Deep in the cold, endless expanse of space, a group of alien explorers drifted silently aboard their ship. They had traveled far from their homeworld, seeking to discover new civilizations, and perhaps gain some advantage over the vast universe. Known as the Jarkar, they were the most intelligent species in their galaxy. They had mastered technology beyond the wildest dreams of most races. Their minds were sharp, their ships fast, and their weapons deadly. They believed there was no race they could not conquer, no challenge they could not overcome. But now, as they approached a dark, distant corner of the galaxy, they had encountered something unlike anything they had ever seen before. "Captain, we have located the target," said the navigator, his voice calm, yet filled with wonder. He stared at the screen in front of him. A massive warship floated motionless in space, cloaked in the shadows of distant stars. The ship was unlike anything the Jarkar had ever encountered. It was enormous, easily the size of 5 of their flagship vessels put together. Its sleek, angular design suggested great power, and yet it was eerily still, almost like it had been abandoned. The faint glow of its dark hull shimmered under the weak light of nearby stars. "Prepare to scan it," Captain Zorath ordered. He was the leader of this mission, an intelligent and calculated being who had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. There was no doubt in his mind that the warship was a remnant of some forgotten race. It was an easy target for their advanced scanning technology. But as the ship's scanners powered up, something strange happened. The data they expected to receive didn't come. The readings were erratic. The instruments flickered, displaying random numbers and unreadable data. Zorath frowned. "Try again. Increase power to the scanners." The crew followed his orders, increasing the output to maximum capacity. But again, the results were the same. The scanners buzzed and hummed, but nothing made sense. They couldn't get any clear reading on the ship. It was as if the warship itself was blocking their effort. "Impossible," muttered the technician. He tapped furiously on his console, trying to adjust the settings. "The ship is emitting interference, but that would require technology beyond even our own." The captain's eyes narrowed as he stared at the screen. Something wasn't right. The warship appeared to be dormant, but the sheer size and design suggested it could be centuries old yet. It was well beyond anything the Jarkar had ever seen. The ship was a mystery wrapped in silence. "We need a closer look," Captain Zorath said. "Prepare to move in. Get within scanning range. Full power." The ship slowly approached the human warship. The closer they got, the more unsettling it became. There was no sign of life on the ship, no signals, no signs of activity. Yet the Jarkar couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was waiting. They could feel it in their bones. As they neared the warship, an inexplicable sensation swept through the crew. It wasn't fear, no. They were beyond fear. It was more like unease, like they were stepping into something they didn't understand, something ancient, something dangerous. "Captain," the navigator said, his voice filled with tension, "I am detecting an energy surge. It's small, but it's there. The ship is alive. Or at least, it's not completely inactive." Zorath's heart rate quickened, but he kept his composure. "Prepare for immediate analysis. I want answers, now." The Jarkar had encountered countless alien ships before. They had studied technology from hundreds of species across the galaxy. But this ship, this one was different. It wasn't just another ancient relic. It felt too powerful, too purposeful. Suddenly, a series of strange symbols flashed on the screen. The ship's outer hull flickered, like it was coming to life. Then, as if mocking the Jarkar's best efforts, the data from their scan abruptly cut off. The warship's energy readings were gone. All their instruments showed was blackness. Pull back now," Zorath shouted, but it was too late. Something had triggered a response from the warship. They could feel the power, a raw, unexplainable force, pushing them back. It was as if the ship didn't want to be found, didn't want to be scanned. For the first time in their lives, the Jarkar realized they might have encountered something they couldn't understand, something they weren't prepared for. They had tried to unlock its secrets, but instead, they had stumbled upon a mystery that could cost them everything. The crew of the Jarkar ship was in shock. They had never encountered anything like this before. The warship, its technology, its energy, and the strange force that pushed them back seemed beyond their understanding. Captain Zorath stood at the helm, his mind racing. He had ordered them to pull back, but the strange sensation of being watched lingered. It was as if the warship knew they were there, even though they hadn't breached its outer defenses. "We need to get a better look," Zorath finally said, his voice steady, but with an edge of determination. "There's something here we haven't figured out, something more than just ancient technology." The crew members exchanged nervous glances. They were the most advanced beings in their galaxy. But this warship had done what no other ship had ever done. It had outsmarted them. They could sense the intelligence behind the ship's silent power, an intelligence that didn't seem to want to reveal itself. The Jarka were known for their sharp minds, but this was no puzzle they could solve with logic alone. It was as if the ship itself was playing a game with them. "Prepare a deeper scan," Zoroth commanded, his voice now firm. "But this time, we will use the backup systems. The primary sensors might be compromised, but our secondary systems should give us a fresh perspective." The technicians quickly got to work, adjusting the settings and running diagnostic checks. The alien crew had been trained for situations like this, where unknown factors disrupted their plans. However, this was different. The warship was something far beyond what they could have anticipated. As the secondary systems powered up, the ship slowly crept closer to the mysterious vessel, moving with caution. The eerie silence of the warship continued to weigh down on them. It wasn't just a lack of sound, it was as though the entire space around them was holding its breath. Then, suddenly, a soft beep echoed through the ship's control room. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, a rhythmic sound that almost seemed to have a pattern. Everyone on board paused, listening intently. The beep wasn't coming from their equipment, it was coming from the warship. "Captain, we're receiving a signal," the technician announced, his voice strained. "It's not much, but there's a pulse of energy emanating from the ship." Zorath leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Can you isolate it?" The technician nodded. "Yes, but it's unlike any communication we've ever encountered. It's like the ship is speaking to us, but in a language we don't understand." The beeping grew stronger, more pronounced. Each pulse seemed to carry a message, but the meaning remained a mystery. The crew was on edge, aware that they were treading into dangerous territory. But Zorath wasn't ready to back down. He couldn't afford to, not after everything they had come this far for. "Open a direct channel," Zorath ordered. "We will attempt to communicate with it." The alien ship's pulse intensified, as if reacting to their actions. Suddenly, the entire control room was flooded with static. A burst of energy shot out from the warship, striking their ship's outer hull. It wasn't a blast, it was more like a wave, a shock wave of energy that pushed their ship backward. The Jarkar vessel rocked violently, its systems momentarily flickering. The crew scrambled to regain control. "What the hell was that?" one of the crew members yelled, his voice tinged with panic. Zorath's eyes widened, his mind racing to make sense of the attack. "That wasn't just a defense mechanism," he muttered. "It's responding, but it's not like any response we've ever seen." The ship's engines hummed as they tried to stabilize, but the pulse from the warship seemed to be guiding them away, pushing them further and further back into the darkness of space. The warship was alive in a way they couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just a vessel of war. It was a force, a living entity with its own will. For the first time, the Jarkar crew realized that they weren't dealing with an abandoned ship, or an ancient relic. They were dealing with something far more dangerous, something that had been waiting for them to arrive. They had awakened a sleeping giant and, now it seemed to be awake, and ready to defend itself. The question was, what would they do next? The crew of the Jarkar ship sat in stunned silence. The pulse of energy had sent their ship reeling, but that wasn't the most terrifying part. What haunted them was the realization that they hadn't just encountered a piece of ancient technology, they had awakened something far more powerful, far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The warship they had tried to scan wasn't just a relic. It was alive with a force that resisted all their attempts to understand it. "Captain, we've tried everything," said the chief technician, his voice shaky. "The scans, the direct communication attempts, they all fail. It's almost as if the ship doesn't want us to know anything about it." Zorath stood at the helm, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. He had led countless missions, outsmarted enemy fleets, and deciphered alien technologies that were centuries ahead of their own. But this was different. It was a riddle wrapped in a mystery that his people's greatest minds couldn't crack. "We can't just turn back," Zorath said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "There's something here, something hidden within this ship, and we won't leave until we find it." As the Jarkar vessel hovered in the shadow of the massive warship, the crew grew increasingly uneasy. The mysterious pulses continued to reverberate from the ship, each one more pronounced than the last. Yet, no matter how many adjustments they made, the warship seemed to reject their efforts. It felt as though the ship itself had a mind, one that actively sought to protect its secrets from any would-be intruders. Zorath's mind raced. He had studied human history, what little there was, specifically their military prowess. The humans weren't the most advanced species in the galaxy. Their technology was crude by Jarkar standards, and yet they had managed to survive in the harshest environments. They had even built warships capable of challenging even the most powerful alien fleets. But this was beyond their understanding. Human technology was far more complex than anything they had anticipated. "Captain," the navigator spoke up, "we've located the warship's power source. It's centralized, deep within the core, but there's something else. The readings, they're erratic. It's almost as if the core itself is shifting, adapting. It's like it's alive." The crew exchanged nervous glances. A warship that adapted, that was no ordinary piece of machinery. It was as if the ship had evolved over time, growing smarter, more unpredictable with each passing year. No one could have anticipated this. The Xhaka had been prepared for ancient weapons or forgotten technology, but nothing could have prepared them for this. Zorath gripped the armrests of his chair, his mind piecing together fragments of information from their encounters with other races. He remembered the stories he had heard of human vessels that were said to adapt during battle, making it impossible to defeat them. The Xhaka had dismissed these stories, thinking them exaggerated, but now, faced with the reality of the warship, he realized how much they had underestimated humanity. "There's a pattern to these pulses," Zorath muttered, deep in thought. "It's almost as if it's trying to communicate with us, or warn us of what?" a crew member asked, fear creeping into his voice. Zorath didn't answer immediately. His eyes fixed on the warship, his mind swirling with possibilities. The pulses seemed to be growing more frequent, more urgent, as if the ship was sending them a message that was just beyond their comprehension. But why? What was it hiding? The answer was simple and terrifying. The warship wasn't just a weapon, it was humanity's last line of defense. They had designed it not to simply conquer, but to protect, to guard against threats like the Xhaka. And now, as the Xhaka ship lingered just outside its reach, the warship was doing what it had been created to do. It was resisting, protecting its secrets, its legacy. It wasn't just a ship, it was a sentient force, designed by humanity to guard their future against invaders. Zorath's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit him. The warship wasn't merely protecting itself, it was preparing for something bigger, something that could destroy them all. "We need to leave," Zorath said finally, his voice a low whisper, barely audible. "We've done enough. This ship, this warship is not just a relic, it's a warning, and if we stay any longer, we might not just be facing the humans, we might be facing something much worse." The Xhaka ship drifted further back into the abyss of space, its engines humming quietly as the crew processed the unsettling truth that had just dawned on them. They had encountered something beyond their understanding, something they had no way of preparing for. The warship they had tried to scan wasn't just a vessel, it was a fortress, a living entity designed to protect humanity's deepest secrets. Yet, even as they withdrew, the feeling of unease lingered in the air. Captain Zorath stood at the command console, his mind racing. The decision to retreat had not come easily. The Xhaka were not known for fear, but the magnitude of what they had discovered was unlike anything they had ever faced. He couldn't shake the thought of what the warship could represent. The humans had built it, but why? And more importantly, how had they designed something so powerful, so resilient? "Captain, we are receiving a distress signal," came a voice from the communications officer. Zorath turned sharply, his heart skipping a beat. The Xhaka ship had been silent. No communication from the warship had followed their retreat, and they had assumed the humans had abandoned their technology long ago. Yet here they were, receiving a signal, faint but unmistakable. "Patch it through." Zorath ordered, his pulse quickening. He could feel a shift in the atmosphere, a crackling tension, as if the very fabric of space around them had been altered. The distress signal grew louder, more insistent, and then it broke through. "Unknown ... A distorted voice began, filled with static. "The warship, prepare yourselves." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only silence in its wake. Zorath's mind churned. Who could this be? A human survivor, or something else entirely? The warship had shown no signs of being abandoned, and this distress signal only deepened the mystery. "We're not alone," Zorath muttered under his breath. He hadn't expected to hear anything from humanity, not after everything they had seen, but this was something new. The crew exchanged looks, their previous confidence now replaced with uncertainty. The warship, once just an enigma, had now become a threat. Its defensive capabilities were unlike anything the Xhaka had ever encountered. The pulses, the waves of energy, the way it had repelled them, everything about it pointed to one thing. The humans had left behind something they did not understand, something that was too dangerous to approach. "Send a recon team," Zorath ordered, his voice firm once more. "Prepare to land on the warship. We need answers. If there's anyone aboard, we need to find them." A few of the crew members exchanged hesitant glances, but no one dared question their leader. The Jacquard had always been a species driven by logic, by intellect. Yet here, faced with this human warship, logic seemed to be slipping through their fingers like sand. What were they really dealing with? The recon team, a group of Jacquard elite soldiers, boarded a smaller shuttle, ready to approach the warship again. As the shuttle neared the massive vessel, the tension among the crew grew palpable. The warship loomed before them, its sleek, dark form casting an imposing shadow over the shuttle. The silent power it exuded was enough to make even the most hardened of Jacquard soldiers uneasy. They docked with the warship, the doors opening with a hiss as the team stepped into the dark, silent corridors of the human vessel. The lights flickered weakly as if the ship was barely functioning. The air was cold, stagnant, and the crew could hear nothing but their own breathing. It was as though time had stopped. They moved cautiously through the ship, scanning each room, every corner, but there was no sign of life. Yet, the further they went, the more they felt the presence of something watching them. Something waiting. Suddenly, one of the soldiers froze. His hand rose to his chest, signaling for silence. In the deep quiet of the ship, a soft low hum began to fill the air. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration, deep and resonant, almost like a heartbeat. The ship was alive, not just with technology, but with a force that had been dormant for so long. A voice echoed through the empty halls, barely audible. "You shouldn't have come." The recon team froze. They weren't alone. The eerie voice echoed through the empty corridors, sending a cold shiver down the spines of the Jacquard recon team. The words, faint and barely comprehensible, seemed to reverberate through the walls of the warship, as if the very ship itself was speaking. It was not a sound they could ignore. The ship, this ancient, powerful vessel, had awakened, and it was not pleased with their presence. The soldiers exchanged tense glances, weapons drawn and ready, their instincts honed for battle. Yet, despite their preparedness, none of them could shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far beyond their understanding. They had come seeking answers, but the very air around them felt charged with an ominous energy. The hum grew louder, pulsing in rhythm with their own heartbeats, almost as if the ship was alive, breathing in the vast emptiness of space. "Captain, we've made contact," the lead soldier whispered into his comm device, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. "But there's something wrong. This ship, it's more than just a vessel. It's something else." Zorath's voice crackled through the comms, cold and determined. "Proceed carefully. If you find anything, report immediately." The recon team pressed forward, moving deeper into the bowels of the warship. The ship seemed endless, its dark metallic walls stretching out in every direction, each hallway eerily quiet except for the unsettling hum. The lights flickered intermittently, casting long, unnatural shadows that danced on the walls. The crew couldn't help but feel they were being watched, that the ship itself was somehow aware of their every move. As they turned a corner, the lead soldier halted suddenly, raising his hand. "Look at this," he murmured. At the far end of the hallway, they saw something, an enormous control panel. Its surface cracked and covered in layers of dust. But the strangest part wasn't the panel itself. It was the symbols etched into the walls around it. They were unfamiliar to the Jacquard, an ancient script they had never encountered in their years of exploration. The symbols glowed faintly, as if still charged with energy, and they pulsed in time with the hum that had filled the ship. This is some kind of communication system," said one of the soldiers, scanning the panel with his device. "But it's unlike anything we've ever seen. It's not a language, it's a code, a pattern." The lead soldier stepped closer to the panel, his fingers brushing against the cracked surface. As soon as his skin made contact, the hum in the air intensified, and the symbols on the walls flared brightly. A low rumbling sound echoed through the ship, and then the voice returned. Louder, clearer. "You should not have come," it repeated. But this time, the voice was different. It was more distinct, more human. "This ship is not yours to control." The team froze in place. The voice now carried a note of warning, an undeniable sense of authority. It wasn't just a recording, nor was it a random message. This voice had been waiting for something, or someone, and now, it had found them. "We need to leave, now," the lead soldier said, his voice tight with fear. But before anyone could react, the ship's lights flickered once again. Then, without warning, the entire corridor was bathed in an unnatural blue light. From the shadows ahead, something began to move. It was a shape, shifting and undulating in the light, a figure that seemed to pulse with energy. The team aimed their weapons at it, but the shape was fluid, impossible to focus on. It moved with unnatural speed, circling around them, always just out of reach. The hum grew deafening, now accompanied by a mechanical sound that seemed to be coming from every direction. The ship itself seemed to be alive, reacting to their presence in ways that were incomprehensible. The walls of the corridor seemed to pulse with energy, the air thick with an electric charge. The recon team was trapped, surrounded by something they couldn't fight, couldn't understand. Then the voice returned, but this time it was not speaking to them, it was speaking about them. "You have trespassed on our legacy," the voice said, its tone colder than before. "This ship is the last of its kind, and its purpose is not to be unraveled by the likes of you." The Jakar soldiers took a step back, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had thought they were the invaders, the conquerors, but now they realized the truth. They were not in control here. They were trespassers, and the warship's defense systems were not just protecting itself, they were guarding something much more important, something far more dangerous. The ship wasn't just a weapon, it was a warning, and the Jakar were the ones being hunted. The air in the warship's corridors grew thicker, the pulse of energy intensifying with each passing second. The Jakar recon team stood frozen, their weapons raised but useless against the ever-changing force that surrounded them. The shape in the shadows continued to shift, moving in and out of the blue light that flooded the hallways, making it impossible to focus or strike. It wasn't a being they could fight, no, it was something far more intangible, something much older than they could have ever imagined. The low hum of the ship had transformed into a deafening roar, as if the very walls themselves were alive, vibrating with power. Every step the team took felt like they were treading on the edge of a precipice, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. The deeper they ventured into the ship, the more it became clear, the warship was not a mere vessel, it was a living organism, one with a purpose far beyond anything they had prepared for. "We need to fall back," one of the soldiers finally whispered, his voice shaky with fear, but his words were drowned out by the sound of the ship's engines humming to life. A low, mechanical sound echoed through the metal walls, and suddenly, the ship seemed to come alive. The very structure of the vessel pulsed with an almost rhythmic energy. The walls shimmered, glowing with the same eerie blue light that had flooded the corridors. "We can't leave," the lead soldier said, his voice tight with determination. "We're too deep in, we need to find out what's really going on here." But the longer they stayed, the more they realized they were no longer in control. The ship wasn't just rejecting their presence, it was guiding them. The corridors twisted and turned in strange patterns, disorienting them, making it feel as though they were walking in circles, never getting any closer to the heart of the warship. It was as though the vessel itself was leading them down a path of discovery, forcing them to uncover its secrets, even if they weren't ready for them. Ahead, they saw a large chamber, bathed in an unnatural glow. The walls were covered in intricate symbols, more advanced and cryptic than any the Jakar had ever seen. They were not just markings, they were a language, one that seemed to pulse with the energy of the ship itself. The symbols twisted and writhed as though they were alive, responding to the presence of the recon team. As they entered the chamber, the voice returned, louder than ever before. "You were never meant to find this." The sound was not just a voice, it was an overwhelming force, filling every corner of the room, vibrating through their bones. The Jakar soldiers staggered, struggling to maintain their footing as the voice continued, echoing within their minds as if it was speaking directly to them. "This ship is the last of its kind," the voice continued, its tone colder, more threatening. "It was built to protect what humanity could never lose, what they needed to survive. But you have disturbed its peace, and for that, you will pay." The room seemed to close in on them, the walls pressing forward as if to crush them under the weight of the truth. The ship wasn't just protecting itself, it was protecting humanity's most dangerous secret, something they had buried away, something they had locked behind the warship's impenetrable defenses. The realization hit Zorath like a bolt of lightning. This warship wasn't just a relic from the past, it was a safeguard, designed to hold back a force more terrifying than anything the Jakar could comprehend. It had been left behind by the humans, not to conquer or protect from enemies, but to keep something imprisoned. Before he could say another word, the floor beneath them began to tremble. The ship was reacting. The air grew heavy with the weight of anticipation. The symbols on the walls shifted, as if unlocking something deep within the warship. Slowly, a massive door at the far end of the room began to open, revealing a chamber beyond. Inside, the team could see something large and glowing, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. The ship had led them here for a reason, and now, they were about to discover what humanity had been hiding all along. "Stay alert," Zorath ordered. "We don't know what we're about to face." The door creaked open, the light from within flooding the chamber. But as the Jakar stepped forward, a chill swept over them. The darkness within the chamber seemed to pulse with power, as though it was waiting for them, and then, a voice, cold and distant, whispered through the air, "You should not have come." The chamber loomed ahead, the doors slowly creaking open, revealing a space unlike any the Jarkar had ever encountered. It wasn't just a room, it was a place of containment, of something far more ancient and powerful than any technology the crew had ever seen. The air was thick with a charged energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. The walls were lined with strange devices, pulsating with an eerie light, but they couldn't focus on them. Not yet. In the center of the chamber, a massive figure lay dormant, suspended in midair, glowing faintly with a cold blue light. It was enormous, larger than any creature the Jarkar had ever encountered. Its form was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a shape that seemed to shift and pulse with an energy that made the ground tremble beneath their feet. It was a being of pure power, something the Jarkar couldn't fully comprehend. "What is this?" Zorath whispered, his voice barely audible. One of the soldiers stepped closer, his weapon aimed cautiously at the creature. "Is it alive?" Zorath could feel if this was the source of the warship's power. Whatever this being was, it was connected to the ship in ways they couldn't even begin to understand. This wasn't just a guard or a weapon, it was something else, something far more profound. The voice returned then, louder and more distinct than ever before, echoing through the chamber and directly into their minds. "You should not have come. The warship was meant to keep you away. It was never meant to let you see what lies within." The Jarkar recoiled, a mix of fear and awe flooding through them. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be speaking through the warship itself, its words filled with an ancient authority. It was clear now the warship wasn't just a relic, it was a prison. The floor beneath them rumbled again, and slowly, the suspended figure began to stir. The light from within it flared brighter, and the air grew thick with a palpable pressure. Zorath felt his body tingle, a sense of dread creeping over him as the creature's form began to shift, its energy reaching out toward them. "It's awakening," Zorath muttered, stepping back instinctively. "We need to leave now." But as they turned to retreat, the chamber doors slammed shut with a violent force, trapping them inside. The air around them grew even colder, and the very walls of the chamber seemed to close in on them. It was as though the ship itself was rejecting them, tightening its grip as the creature began to move. The figure's form was not entirely humanoid, but it was vaguely familiar, as though its shape had been inspired by something human. It was covered in a translucent, shimmering skin that seemed to ripple with an energy that defied logic. The soldiers raised their weapons, but they were too slow. The creature's energy surged, and with a pulse of light, their weapons were rendered useless, falling silent in their hands. "You were never meant to see what we have hidden here," the voice echoed again, the words more forceful now, almost pleading. "The warship was created to contain the worst of humanity's past, the dark legacy they left behind. What you see before you is not a being, it is a force, a remnant of their greatest mistake. A mistake that should never have been released." But Jarkar stood frozen in place, their minds racing. They had always thought of themselves as conquerors, the smartest beings in the galaxy, able to unravel any mystery. But this was beyond their comprehension. The creature before them was not something they could defeat. It was not something they could control. It was a force pure and untamably, and it had been locked away for a reason. The air crackled with energy as the creature's eyes, if they could be called eyes, they were pools of endless darkness, filled with the void of space itself. The Jarkar could feel their minds being pulled toward them, as though the creature was reaching into their very souls, unraveling their thoughts. And then, it spoke, its voice cold and distant, yet oddly familiar. "Humanity did not just create this ship to protect their future. They created it to protect themselves from me. I am their greatest failure, and now, I will return." The walls shook with an intensity that sent shockwaves through the ship. The creature began to move, its form twisting and turning as it grew in size, filling the room with an overwhelming presence. It was not just a prison or a ship, it was the keeper of something much darker, something the Jarkar had unknowingly unleashed. And as the creature stepped forward, Zorath realized with a chilling certainty, they hadn't just found a warship, they had found the end of the galaxy itself.